You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. On August 2nd, 1964, near the North Vietnamese coast in the Gulf of Tonkin, the USS Maddox encountered 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats. During the clash, U.S. forces inflicted heavy damage on one torpedo boat while the other 2 were driven away by aircraft from the USS Ticonderoga. A couple of days later, on August 4th, the U.S. Navy reported another incident where North Vietnamese vessels allegedly launched torpedoes at the USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy. This led to the U.S. Congress passing the Tonkin Gulf Resolution on August 7, 1964. This resolution gave President Lyndon B. Johnson the power to use military force in Southeast Asia to counteract North Vietnamese aggression without needing a formal war declaration from Congress. Despite the authority to act militarily against North Vietnam and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, President Johnson was cautious about escalating military actions. During the latter part of 1964, as he was campaigning for re-election, Johnson did not want to give the impression that he was dragging the U.S. into war. He chose to wait until after the election results before considering further military strategies. Meanwhile, South Vietnam faced its own turmoil. In August 1964, an attempted coup by General Lam Vun Phat was stopped, leading to a shaky transfer of power among military leaders and politicians. By December 20, 1964, a new military junta was formed, dissolving the civilian-led High National Council and deepening the political instability. Over in Moscow, during November and December 1964, Soviet leaders deliberated on providing military aid to North Vietnam. While the specifics of these discussions weren't publicized, the first sign of Soviet involvement came on December 24, 1964, when they invited the North Vietnamese-backed Viet Cong to establish a mission in Moscow. Then, on February 4, 1965, McGeorge Bundy, National Security Advisor to President Johnson, arrived in Saigon to review the political situation with the U.S. Ambassador to South Vietnam, General Maxwell Taylor. Shortly after, on February 6, 1965, Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin landed in Hanoi with a team of missile experts, marking a significant visit to North Vietnam. In the early part of 1965, while the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union were laying out their plans for Vietnam, the Viet Cong 409th Battalion received orders to kick off the Communist Spring Offensive. Their mission was to strike the U.S. airfield at Camp Holloway, located near Pleiku in Gia Lai Province, and also target the South Vietnamese Army base in Gia Hu, Binh Dinh Province. Camp Holloway, positioned about 2.5 miles east of Pleiku, was established by the U.S. Army's 81st Transportation Company back in August 1962 and named in honor of Chief Warrant Officer Charles E. Holloway, who lost his life in action later that year. By the end of 1964, roughly 400 U.S. Army members from the 52nd Combat Aviation Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel John C. Hughes, were deployed there to assist the South Vietnamese and other allies in the Un Corps and Two Corps tactical zones. The leader of the Viet Cong 409th Battalion, Nguyen Thanh Tum, instructed his 30th Company to head into the Central Highlands for a reconnaissance mission and to prepare to attack the U.S. airfield at Camp Holloway and a nearby U.S. advisory compound. By February 1965, Camp Holloway was guarded by a South Vietnamese security team that included various military units. Although challenging, the Viet Cong noted the U.S. advisory compound's security, consisting of multiple layers of high concertina wire fences, as a significant obstacle. Tom devised a plan for his 30th Company to divide into 2 groups for the attack. The first, under his own command, aimed to destroy U.S. aircraft and secure an escape route. The second, led by Ngo Trong Dai, was to target the U.S. advisory compound and living quarters of the U.S. personnel. Armed with mortars and supported by additional Viet Cong troops, they were tasked with breaching the concertina wire fences and setting up defenses for their retreat. Sappers and local forces were involved to clear obstacles and ambush potential reinforcements. On the night of February 6, 1965, around 300 Viet Cong troops assembled outside Camp Holloway and initiated their attack. Despite nearly compromising their mission by tripping an electrical wire after breaching the wire fences, they remained undetected by U.S. patrols. With only 44 South Vietnamese guards on duty, the Viet Cong launched their assault shortly before 2 a.m. on February 7th, targeting the airfield and the advisory compound with gunfire. A U.S. sentry managed to thwart the Viet Cong from entering one of the barracks by firing at them as they placed explosives. However, after inflicting damage, the Viet Cong retreated about 5 minutes later, leaving behind a toll of 7 U.S. soldiers dead, 104 wounded, and significant damage to aircraft. The Viet Cong claimed to have taken out 20 aircraft and over 100 U.S. and South Vietnamese personnel. Interestingly, Bill Malden, a U.S. editorial cartoonist who was visiting his son at the base, found himself in the midst of the attack but was unharmed. On the morning of February 7, 1965, news of the Camp Holloway attack reached Saigon, prompting General William Westmoreland, McGeorge Bundy, and Ambassador Maxwell Taylor to head to Pleiku to assess the damage. Bundy made a call to President Johnson advocating for retaliatory airstrikes against North Vietnam, as suggested by the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. Johnson quickly organized a National Security Council meeting, which included top congressional leaders, to deliberate on striking back at the communists in Vietnam. That same afternoon, General Nguyen Khanh met with Westmoreland and Bundy in Pleiku, where they shared that they had recommended airstrike to the U.S. president. In just 12 hours after the initial attack, Johnson initiated Operation Flaming Dart, targeting North Vietnamese positions with 49 U.S. fighter bombers launching from the USS Coral Sea and USS Hancock towards barracks in Dong Huy, just above the 17th parallel. The action delighted Khanh, who celebrated with champagne, seeing it as a morale boost for South Vietnamese forces and a sign of the U.S.'s commitment against North Vietnam. However, the Viet Cong launched another offensive on February 10th against a U.S. base in Quy Nhon, killing 23 U.S. military personnel, which led to an even larger assault by U.S. and South Vietnamese forces on Chap Le and Chan Hoa. This period of bombing had significant implications for North Vietnam's relations, particularly with the Soviet Union. Since Ho Chi Minh established control in 1954, the relationship with the Soviets had been strained, demonstrated by disagreements over United Nations representation and the refusal to sign the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1964. The U.S.'s retaliatory strikes after the Gulf of Tonkin incident received a lukewarm response from the Soviet Union, but the North Vietnamese hesitated to criticize, hoping for military support. The dismissal of Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in October 1964 turned out to benefit North Vietnam. His successors, wanting to reduce Chinese influence, agreed to a defense pact with North Vietnam. During a visit by Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin to Hanoi, further U.S. airstrikes led to a joint communique with North Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Van Dong on February 10, 1965, pledging Soviet support for North Vietnam's defense. By April 1965, a missile agreement was signed in Moscow, providing North Vietnam with crucial support against Operation Rolling Thunder. A notable figure was Tan Minh Tam, a Sadang soldier from the Viet Cong's 90th Sapper Company, who reportedly destroyed 16 U.S. aircraft with 8 explosive charges during this attack. He was honored with the Hero of the People's Armed Forces Award on September 19, 1967. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.